welcome to City View. I'm so glad that you're with us today, and I hope that you've had an incredible week so far. Last Sunday was so much fun as we celebrated our Christmas party. It was beautiful with the market lights outside, lighting the tree, or singing the carols, having Mr. and Mrs. Claus here, and snow. It was incredible, so I'm so glad for those of you that could make it. It was such a sweet time, and so we cannot wait to share that again with you next year. It's one of our favorite events that we do around here, so I'm glad that you could join us. And then parents, we hope that you had a great night Friday night, just taking some time out for yourselves, you as a couple to go out on a date night and do something fun, or maybe go shopping and pick up those last minute Christmas gifts. But we're so glad that you took that opportunity, and we love being able to serve you and your families in that way, to give you some uninterrupted time just for you. Christmas is right around the corner. It's so crazy. I can't believe it's almost here. And our Christmas Eve services are coming up on December the 24th. It's on a Saturday, and we're going to have two opportunities for you to join us. So it's 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. We know a lot of you have Christmas Eve festivities as well with your families, and so we want you to come join us and bring your families and friends along with us to enjoy a special Christmas Eve service. Last year, it was truly beautiful as we spent that time together. The place was packed, and it was just such an inspirational service. And so we hope that you will get out of your comfort zones a little bit and invite those friends and family that don't typically come to church. It's a great opportunity to do that, as some people are looking for some place to go on Christmas Eve. And what better place to be than right here, knowing that they can feel at home and feel loved during this holiday season. So I will see you after with a challenge for you and tell you a little bit more information about what's going on here. But for right now, enjoy the message and some awesome worship.
Well, hey, welcome to part 2 of our Coming King series. And we've been diving into Isaiah 9 and looking at the titles that Jesus was given before he was even born. These titles of Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. And last week we talked about Jesus being that wonderful counselor to us. The reality is that as every day of December ticks by, it's like the craziness and the busyness of the season gets a little crazier. And the pulls on our lives, the strains, all of the things that are going on, it can feel so overwhelming in the season. Emotions that are high and emotions that are low, and loneliness and too much connectivity and seeing friends that you haven't seen in a long time and family. And all of it brings us to this place where internally there's so much going on within us. And we talked about the impact of having that wonderful counselor to be able to open ourselves up to and connect with. The reality is that in these seasons, it's more important than ever for us to take time to connect with God. Even more reason for us to listen for his voice in our lives, to hear his voice speak through all of the chaos, and so that we can stay tuned to him and connected with him in a unique and a powerful way. And speaking of voices, that's kind of where I want to start today. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never been kind of like the most popular kid on the block, right? I've never been the cool kid. I've kind of hung around the middle. Like I wasn't like on the outside, but I just was kind of just mediocre, right in the middle. I had a bunch of friends, but I wasn't ever the one that they all look to and they're like, oh, you're the one that, you've got all the answers. You're the cool one, right? Like that's just not my life. But from the time that I was young, I felt this urge, this passion, this feeling within me that I was meant to accomplish something of significance. That I was meant to do something significant with my life. And everybody always talks about doing something big. Well, big is very relative to what's going on. Like I felt like my life was meant for something. I felt called to something, destined, set apart to do something of significance. And as a young leader, for many years, I felt so kind of stuck where I was. Like I felt overlooked, not just because I'm short, it'd be nice, but just feeling like, man, I have more to offer. Like we talked about in the series of David, like I feel like I have something here. And for the people who would listen, or even just talking to myself, it was like, I just want a voice at the table. Like if I just had a shot to sit at that table and have a voice, I don't have to be the main voice, but just a voice. I feel like God has something that he wants to speak through me. And this was a problem when I was in my early 20s because I was so desperate to have a voice, and I was so tired of feeling like I was just part of the pack instead of actually being a leader in the way that I knew God had wired me to be. And it led to some really challenging things, and I eventually got to this place where I felt like I'd waited enough. Lauren and I had gone on staff at the largest church we had ever served at by far, and in there, we had this interesting dynamic through this season of time. It was a super healthy place, an incredible place, a place that we still consider our home church. And man, it just, this particular season of the church, we were navigating a lot of things, and we just happened to be walking onto staff at that point. And every week after we had our like staff meeting, there were always these meetings after the meetings. Right, you work in a job with other people, like you have your meeting all together and then everybody kind of goes to their office and they're like, what was that? And so these little things were happening, nothing major, nothing like the ship was about to wreck, but just little complaints of like, man, they made that decision and they didn't even think about my department and how that impacted me, and we're doing yet another thing. I already feel stretched. I don't know how we're going to do this. Just these little tension points all throughout the organization. And I just happened to be on several teams at the time and just feeling this tension from everywhere. And the thing that I've learned in life is that there are tension managers And then there are tension solvers. Tension managers are those kind of people, they just go with the flow. They quietly complain, but they're not going to rock the boat. They just manage the tension. They just kind of work through it. They just see how it's going to play out. And hey, I'm not trying to do anything crazy. But then there are tension solvers. People like me who are like, wait. We need to talk through this. We need to process this. We need to say the words. Like if you've got an issue, let's say it. Let's get it out in the open. Let's process it. Let's solve the tension. And what I've learned as a leader is not all tension is meant to be solved. Some tension is meant to be managed. But at the time, I didn't believe that. I think everything can be solved with a good, hard conversation. With truth and transparency, we'll be able to get through this. And honestly, it's something that Lauren and I still navigate to this day because she's definitely a tension manager. I'm still a bit of a tension solver. And when we get in the argument, I'm like, hey, look, I'm wrong. You're right. I'm sorry. I'll do better. We get it. Now let's go have some fun. Like it's all over. It's happy. And she's like, chill, bro. I still need a minute. I need to sleep this one off. I'll wake up in the morning with a new attitude, and it's like 8:30 p.m., and I'm like, come on! The whole night has to be ruined. Like, can't we be done with this? It's solved. And so I got into this moment as a tension solver, just right where you are. If you're a tension solver, just let me know. Just raise your hand in the comment section. Let me know I'm not alone here. But as this tension solver, I went into our next staff meeting, and I said, we're going to deal with this. We're going to handle this today. So the meeting was going on, and I raised my hand, and I spoke up in the meeting. I said, hey, just in some conversations that have been happening over the last couple weeks, I understand the direction we're going. I'm really excited about it, but I think there's some tension in the room, and I feel like there's some questions about why we're doing this and how we're doing this, and just almost feeling like some of the departments weren't really considered when we made this decision. And I just think it would be really important for us to kind of talk about it. And the room got silent. And the lead pastor graciously said, okay, that's fine. Well, does anyone else feel this way? If so, let's talk about it. I'm smiling. I look across the room at Lauren, and she's just shaking her head. I can't believe this is happening. And the room is silent. I just knew everyone was going to start talking. And so I start looking around the room at the people who had been running their mouths. And I can't find an eye in the entire room. Everybody's like, not me. And finally, the lead pastor was like, well, Danny, unfortunately, it seems like you're the only one who feels that way. And in that moment, I lost some credibility. In that moment, I hurt some of my progress. You see, when our desires lead our decisions, we allow our need for control to interfere with God's plan. When our desires lead our decisions. My desire to desperately have a voice led me to this decision that I'm just trying to help people. It was with good intention. It's with good motivation. And I just thought this was the moment. And after that meeting, I had 10 people come up to me and go, thank you for bringing it up. I appreciate you going out on the limb, but I just wasn't ready to go out there with you. And I just learned a massive lesson in that moment. And the reason why I tell you that story is because I think that we view and we think of having a voice or having power or having influence very differently than God views it. And it's important for us to grasp that and understand that. As we look at Isaiah 9:6, we see Jesus described in some powerful ways in respect to this idea of a mighty God. In verse 4, it says, for you will break the yoke of their slavery. You will lift the heavy burden from their shoulders. This is all speaking of might. You will break the oppressor's rod, just as you did when you destroyed the army of Midian. For a child is born to us, a son is given. The government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. You see, we see Jesus described as this mighty God, a coming king who would have power to impact people's lives. He would have the authority to shift the way life was done. He had the possibility of changing the trajectory of a nation. And it's why when we think about a mighty God, we think about it in a certain context. We think about it in force and power and strength and moving things, forcing things. And the truth is, the Jewish people who were desperately waiting for this Messiah to show up, that's exactly how they viewed this coming Messiah, this coming king. When they see these words about a mighty God, they think, oh man, he's going to come in and he's going to overthrow the Roman government. He's going to rescue them from oppression. He's going to bring Israel back to prominence. This mighty God was going to come riding in on a battle-worn stallion with a flaming sword and his hair flapping in the wind. Like they just knew this mighty God was going to look this certain way. But the Messiah that they received in Jesus looked completely different than the one they expected. And it leads us to ask this really important question. What do you do when you have power? What do you do when you have power? I don't know, most of you right now are sitting there watching this and you're like, Danny, that's really cute. That's cute you think I have power. Do you know where I'm at right now? I'm in sweatpants. I'm in yoga pants. I don't have power over anybody. What are you talking about? Well, what if we think about it this way? What do you do when you have the upper hand? What do you do when you have the upper hand over one of your employees or over a coworker? How do you handle that power? What do you do when you are the one who has the power to forgive and allow the relationship to take steps towards healing? What do you do when you have the power to forgive? You have the power to change how the atmosphere between you and that person is. What do you do when you have the power to bring up their past mistakes rather than highlighting their present progress? What do you do when you have the power to go, well, you always do. You never do. Do you remember when you did this? Do you use that power versus the power that you have of going, man, I've noticed how hard you've been working to shift this in our relationship. Thank you for that. That's power. What do you do when you have the ability to honor somebody versus joining the crowd and bringing shame to them? When everybody else at your job is making fun of that boss, making fun of that person, making fun of that leader, that decision. When you have power in that moment, do you choose to show honor? Do you choose shame? You see, this truth on the screen is power doesn't equal force. It speaks to our ability to influence. To influence our family, to influence our friends, to influence our spouse, to influence our children, to influence our coworkers, to influence our neighbors. You have far more power than you realize that you do. So what does a mighty God do with power? What is a mighty God who has the authority, the influence, the capacity to completely change the world around him with force if he wanted to? What does a mighty God do when he has all authority and power at his disposal? Paul tells us in his letter to the church in Philippi, in Philippians 2, starting verse 5, it says, "And consider the example that Jesus, the Anointed One, has set before us. Let his mindset become your motivation. He existed in the form of God, yet he gave no thought to seizing equality with God as his supreme prize. Instead, he emptied himself of his outward glory by reducing himself to the form of a lowly servant. He became human. He humbled himself and became vulnerable, choosing to be revealed as a man and was obedient. He was a perfect example, even in his death, a criminal's death by crucifixion. Because of that obedience, God exalted him and multiplied his greatness. He has now been given the greatest of all names. A friend of ours, Fred Garman, describes this as Jesus descending into greatness. You see this on the screen. It's this stepping down. And it begins with Jesus being equal with God, but not viewing that, not flaunting that equality, not something to chase, not something to brag about, but instead he pointed the attention to the Father. He would say as he walked the planet, hey, not me, but you, Father. He didn't consider equality with God something to be motivated. It wasn't, as Paul said, it wasn't his supreme prize. So he lowers himself. He steps down. He descends by emptying himself, by removing himself from his heavenly form. Jesus, who was with God at the beginning of the earth, he was with God at creation, as we see in John 1. God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit working together to accomplish. Jesus removes himself from there and is born as a baby. Have you ever thought about, just pause, like we think about Jesus as a baby and then he grows up and we kind of lose the in-between, but have you ever thought about the fact that Jesus placed himself in the most vulnerable position a human can be in as an infant? There's nowhere in Scripture that says that Jesus could not have shown up as a 30-year-old man and just began his ministry, come from heaven as a grown man, but instead he chose to lower himself to be a baby who was dependent on a human family to provide for him and feed him and grow up experiencing the totality of our life from birth to death. Jesus lowered himself. He descended. And then he continued to say, not only did he lower himself to a place of a baby, but he came as a servant in the form of a slave. Jesus was born into a time when Rome ruled over Israel. Israel was captive to Rome. So Jesus was born in this time where they were oppressed, they were taxed, there was very little freedom for them to experience. And not only that, being born into a Hebrew family, he came in and he lived out and lived under the law of the Jews. He lived out these 600 plus rules and regulations. Jesus humbled himself to fulfill the law rather than live outside of the law. He didn't consider himself above the law. He came in the form of a servant and a slave. And then he humbled himself by the way that he served his disciples. He served the people of Israel. He even served the people that Israel despised, the Romans, the Samaritans, the tax collectors, the lepers. And that wasn't enough. He lowered himself to the point that he died for our sins. He lived the perfect life, yet surrendered it all for us. He took the punishment that rightfully belonged to us. But not only did he didn't just die. He died on a criminal's cross. He died as a criminal would, naked and beaten and spit on and shamed and abused, continually humbling himself, descending from greatness, the one who had all the power, all the authority, that was fully God and fully man, who could have at any point changed the circumstance. Instead, he descended into greatness rather than climbing the ladder to prominence. And what was the ultimate response? God exalted him. God lifted him up. God gave him the name above every other name. The name that saves, the name that heals, the name that brings hope. God elevated him because he descended into greatness. The challenge for you and I today to understand is the measure of our influence, the measure of our power is directly connected to our level of humility. This influence that you desperately want, this impact that you want to make, this power that you hope you'll have one day, not so that you can use it for your own agenda, but use it to help people. That power and that impact you want to have is directly connected to your level of humility. It's so important for us to see. So how do we shift this in our lives? How do we descend into greatness and allow God to be the one who exalts us rather than us chasing after getting to the top on our own? How do we do that? In the couple minutes we have left, I want to give you 3 really quick ways. The first one is this, is when we live our lives led by a mighty God, we seek to protect rather than project. We seek to protect rather than project. Isaiah 9:4, as we saw, says, "For you will break the yoke of slavery, lift the heavy burden from their shoulders. You will break the oppressor's rod." This is serving, this is helping, this is protecting, not projecting. What do I mean by that? In this book, The Voice of the Heart, that I've shared with you guys, that has been so impactful for me over the last several months, from Dr. Chip Dodd, he talks about how we project our emotions onto others. And he uses the example of sadness as just one of the emotions we project onto others. And he says it this way, it's so good. Self-pity is a way to avoid genuine sadness. Rather, we use self-pity to defend against our sadness and avoid exposing our hearts. In other words, this is so important, listen to this. I try to make you feel the sadness that I need to feel for myself. So good. Think about it this way. Have you ever had a bad mood that was contagious? Right? You've been there. Have you ever been in a funky mood and you look around the room and all of a sudden everyone's caught your funkiness and the whole day is just ruined? We just pass it on like a cold in preschool. Like we just share that funkiness with each other. And listen to me, this is so important. Everyone is entitled to have a bad day. Everyone is entitled to experience the feelings that you're feeling. Too many times we tell you, just suck it up, just move on. That's not what I'm saying here. Everyone is entitled to a bad day, but you get to choose how that bad day impacts the people around you. You get to choose whether or not, am I going to protect those with whom I have influence? Am I going to share this with them in a way that isn't projecting my emotions on them, but instead is saying, hey, I'm experiencing this. I want to guard you from taking this on. I want to do this together. Or are you just projecting your emotions? As Chip Dodd says, are you asking them to feel the sadness for you that you're unwilling to feel for yourself? You're asking them to be angry, just as angry as you are. You're asking them to be as fearful as you are, to be as anxious as you are. You're not understanding how anxious I am. How about I rev up my anxiety so that you feel some of this anxiousness too? Listen, this is not our intent. This is not our motivation. We don't want to hurt the people that we love, but if we're not careful, we will project our emotions rather than protect those we love. You see, you have the power and the authority from the God in heaven to make a choice how your life will influence the people around you. I'm going to tell you something that the rest of the world won't tell you. You are not a victim to your emotions. They're yours. And Jesus died on the cross so that emotion, that feeling, that fear, that anxiety no longer has power over you. You have the choice whether to allow Jesus to give you the power to handle it in a healthier way, or are you going to allow it to become toxic in your life? You have the authority and power through Jesus Christ. Again, you have permission to feel it. Feel the emotion. Own it. Cry the tears. Feel the feelings. But be careful when you try to force others to feel the way that you're feeling, because then you rob them of the ability to actually sympathize and empathize with you, because you're trying to force them to feel what you're feeling. That's not protecting, that's projecting. It's an important thing for us to draw a line. The second thing is, when our lives are led by a mighty God, we seek to serve before we demand a say. We seek to serve before we demand a say. You see, one of the best things about social media is that it has given everyone a voice. But one of the worst things that social media has ever done is it's given everybody a voice. Two things can be true. It's important that we understand that our voice carries weight, but sometimes I think we demand a say before we're willing to serve. We demand a say. But as followers of Jesus, we have to understand the model he gave us. Jesus, the one who had every reason to climb the ladder to prominence. Jesus, who had every ability to step in front of the political leaders of the Jews and the Romans and go, you people don't even have real power. I have the power. He had all authority and power to do that. Instead of demanding his voice be heard, he humbled himself and he served 12 men with passion and with purpose. One of the 12 would betray him and lead to his death on a cross. The other, who would eventually lead the church in the future for him, denied him, so much so cursing people out for even mentioning their names together in the same sentence. These are the people that Jesus gave his life to, poured every ounce of himself into. He didn't demand a voice at the highest halls of policy and procedures. He humbled himself to a place where he chose to serve, to wrap a towel around his waist and wash the feet of these disciples. And I think so many times we get caught up in demanding a say before we're willing to serve. Paul encourages us in Romans 12 how we handle this, how we deal with this. And he said, let the inner movement of your heart always be to love one another and never play the role of an actor wearing a mask. Don't bring that fake love. Despise evil and embrace everything that is good and virtuous. Be devoted to tenderly loving your fellow believers as members of one family. I've always loved this. Try to outdo yourself in respect and honor of one another. Be enthusiastic to serve the Lord, keeping your passion towards him boiling hot. Radiate with the glow of the Holy Spirit and let him fill you with excitement as you serve him. Paul says, I want you to outdo each other. I want it to be competitive the way that you love each other. I want you to outwork, outdo, outlove, outshine, outserve one another. Not out of false motives, not out of fake love. Oh, yes, brother, I'm doing wonderful today. Thank you so much. Stop. Genuine affection and passion for one another. He says, move that way. I just wonder how different your relationships would be if you were desperately focused on serving one another's needs. How different would your marriage be if you made the decision that, hey, before I demand a say, before I demand a voice in this, I'm going to serve you with every ounce of my being. I'm going to do everything in my power to serve your needs. Well, if he would just do this, I would. If she would do this, then I would do. Stop. One of the greatest pieces of advice that I ever received, and I wrote it down, and it's meant the world to me when it came to my marriage. My friend said to me, Danny, every day of your life, choose to prioritize her needs above yours. Serve her and communicate her value to you as often as possible. And it changed everything. And I know what some of you are thinking right now. That's good for you, Danny, but what about when she, what about when he, and what, man, listen, I hear you. There are some extreme situations, there are some extreme circumstances that will bring you to a point where it's just not healthy for you to continue to pour out of that bucket to each other. Extreme situations. Let's make that very clear. There comes points and times when it's not healthy for either one of you, and you have to navigate through those things. But in my experience, we point to the extremes as an excuse to be lazy in the ordinary. We point to the extremes. Well, what about this situation? I heard this one time on Facebook, this one guy. Come on. We point to these extremes and we use it as an excuse for why in the ordinary. Well, he didn't take out the trash. She didn't wash the dishes fast enough. He didn't. That's not extreme, man. That's just normal. Serve one another. Stop pointing to the extremes that you read in a story somewhere as the reason why you won't serve your spouse, won't serve your friends, won't love your neighbor the way that Jesus called you to. Because what if somehow one time I'm serving them and they end up murdering me in the basement somewhere? What are you talking about? Love people, serve people, give your life to pouring out to those around you. Yes, we need healthy boundaries. Yes, we need to have white space in our calendars. Yes, we need to be careful to how many things we're saying yes to. All of those things are true. But if your life is not marked by the way you love and serve the people around you, you're missing the model that Jesus gave us. You're missing it. Every day, every situation is not the extreme. Jesus had every reason to not serve people, but he chose to do it instead. Let me wrap up. The last one is this, is when we live our lives led by a mighty God, we choose grace and honor over shame and blame. I love how the psalmist puts it in Psalms 103. He's speaking of God. He says, you don't look at us only to find our faults, just so that you can hold a grudge against us. You may discipline us for our many sins, but never as much as we really deserve. Nor do you get even with us for what we've done. Higher than the highest heavens, that's how high your tender mercy extends. Greater than the grandeur of heaven, above is the greatness of your loyal love, towering over all who fear you and bow down before you. Farther than from a sunrise to a sunset. That's how far you've removed our guilt from us. You see, our mighty God, with all the power of heaven and earth, chooses to shower us with grace and with mercy. He treats us with honor and purpose, even when we break his heart over and over again. So who are we to use the little iota of power that we have to hold judgment and shame over people for their mistakes? If the God who has given us everything he possibly could will forgive us over and over and over and over and over and over, this little bit of power and influence that we have in the relationships in our lives and the connections we have in our lives, how dare we sit on the throne of judgment when God is sitting on the throne of grace? We've got to check ourselves, family. It's so important for us to check ourselves. Because you see, the longer that we traffic in guilt, the further we find ourselves from grace. The more time we spend in our lives pointing the fingers, the further and further we get from understanding the grace that's been so freely given to us. So as we get ready to pray today, my challenge to you is understand that might and power and influence and a voice, it should motivate us to descend, to humble ourselves into greatness, rather than trying to climb the ladder to prominence, rather than trying to use this little bit of power we have for our own gain, use this little bit of power to make them feel what we felt when they hurt us. Instead of using the little bit of influence and the power that we have, understand that a mighty God shows humility and honor. And you and I have the opportunity to choose the same thing. Let's pray. Jesus, would you help us to choose humility over status? Jesus, would you help us to choose grace over guilt? Would you give us the courage to serve over demanding a say? Would you move our hearts to protect rather than project? Would you help us, God, to understand that might and power and influence, the healthiest versions of those, are the ones when our actions are filtered through humility. And Jesus, so many of us don't recognize the power that we actually have, the influence that we actually have, the power that our words carry, the power that our actions carry to those around us. Would you reveal to us the fact that we are impacting and influencing more people than we could ever imagine? Would you help us be good stewards of that, as you were an incredible steward with the might and the power and the influence you were given? Jesus, help us to choose humility, just as you did. We pray all of this in your name. Amen.
I think we can all agree that we tend to want to take control of our own lives. And many times it's not till we get those hard places where we're like, okay, Lord, I need a little help right now. I don't know about you, but I definitely do that. And so I love what Pastor Danny said about our desires really leading our decisions. And so as you think about your life this weekend, think about how you may try to take control. Are you allowing your own desires, the things that you want for your life, leading your decisions, or are you leaving that up to God? Such a great question to ask ourselves this week, especially as we go into this season. Last week, we talked a little bit about our Christmas offering, and we've been leaking out some information about it over the last few weeks, which has been so exciting. And our Christmas offering is such a humbling offering that we take up every year. As those proceeds that come in, we are able to give that away to so many organizations and local community efforts, global efforts, and those within our church that need a little bit extra help this year. And so last week we talked a little bit about some of the efforts that we're doing, and that is we want to sponsor 10 of our very own students to go to Winterfest, which is a conference for students middle school through high school in January. And we want to support those students and be able to let them go for free. We know that families with multiple teenagers, it's hard to do that, but we believe so much in this next generation that we want to partner and send them on a trip where they can be filled with God's love, where they can just learn more about themselves and who He's created them to be, and be leaders in their own environment. And so we want to invest in them. So if you can partner with us to support those 10 students to go, that would be incredible. We also talked about expanding our global efforts for water. Last year, we dug 2 wells in Africa, and this year we're wanting to support 10 families in Quito, Ecuador with clean water. In Quito, Ecuador, it's the 3 out of the 5 diseases that they have that are caused because of their water. They do not have clean water where they live, and so we want to expand that reach from Africa to Ecuador and supply these families with clean water to have healthy lives for generations to come. Another organization we're partnering with is a family that we know well that are part of our global missions in our denomination, and they are actually missionaries to Southeast Asia. And what they are doing is they're actually coming alongside of church planters, which we know all about church planting because we've been there and we are there. And they are helping to support these pastors. And what's hard is, as a pastor, transportation is one of the biggest problems that they have in Southeast Asia. And so we want to come alongside and raise enough money to buy at least 2 church planter pastors there motorcycles, as they do not have those. You can imagine it's got to be hard to visit people, to go see anyone when you can only transport by foot. And Asia is huge. And so we want to come alongside of them, give them the transportation that they need to expand their ministry and make a big effort with where they're at. They're also trying to plant 30 churches in Southeast Asia. And so we just have a big heart for church planters. You guys are here because of this church plant in this community, and we're so grateful for that. And we know how much it's meant to all of us, and we want to expand that reach and help others in Southeast Asia to do that, the same thing in their community. So we look forward to just continue to just partner in new ways in our Christmas offering, expanding our reach. And those are just 3 of the opportunities that we have. We have 2 more that we'll be telling you a little bit more about coming up shortly. But think about how you can be partnering with us. Pray about it and see how the Lord is leading you. Our goal is $20,000. Last year we exceeded that, and I know we can do that again. And so thank you for the difference that you're making and allowing God to let you live on mission through your giving. Thank you for not giving to City View, but giving through City View and making a difference in our community, throughout our community, and globally. You can give at cityviewcc.com/give. We're so grateful for you and cannot wait to share all the stories that are come out of this giving. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.